honored to be partnering with the Embassy of Hungary and to be joined by His Excellency Mr. Attila Horváth, the Ambassador of Hungary, who will be speaking to you later, as well as Tali, the director and founder of the Holocaust and the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center. Okay. I'm sure a few more people will be joining us as we go along, but for now, I would like to hand over to you to His Excellency Mr. Attila Horváth, who will be addressing us.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear Tali, Catherine, and Andrea. I am very pleased that despite the coronavirus epidemic, we have managed to organize this online commemoration thanks to the technology of our modern age. Let me start my speech with a personal memory. In 1984, I saw the film The Revolt of Job with my classmates in cinema. At the age of 15, I was very impressed by the way the makers of the film tried to portray through the eyes of a small child the horrors that rural Jews had to suffer, starting from their humiliation till their deportation. The other reason I really liked the film, and the reason that it made a lasting impression on me, was the authenticity of its characters and its moral, that without true and authentic people, it's not possible to survive the cataclysm of history. Veronica Phillips was such an authentic, true person. Unfortunately, I didn't have the chance to meet her personally, but every commemoration and personal account of her proves her greatness and authenticity. The other significant fact about Veronica Phillips is that she considered it her personal mission to reach out to young people and was actively involved in the programs intended for the young generation. Perhaps we couldn't commemorate Veronica Phillips in a more dignified way than with a lecture that introduces a program whose aim is to inform young people about the horrors of Holocaust in order to teach them that anti-Semitism is not a natural disaster, but the work of human beings. So no matter what age we are living, everyone must feel their own personal responsibility and must make sure that no such thing could ever happen in future again. I'm sure that the example Veronica Phillips set forth with her life, the Holocaust commemoration similar to this, and the films that show the cruel everyday reality of anti-Semitism will help the young people of today to understand the terrible mistake of the past and help them create a better future. Finally, I would like to thank Tali, founder and director of the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center, and my colleague Zsuzsanna Rothschild, the deputy head of mission, for organizing today's commemoration. And I would really recommend you to watch the film, The Revolt of Job, whose link you can find in your invitation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, and welcome to South Africa. It is indeed an honor to work with you and with your team at the embassy. Our dear Holocaust survivors that joined us today, our dear friends from March of the Living Hungary that joined us today, and many members from the Durban Holocaust and Genocide Center, from the Cape Town Holocaust and Genocide Center, and from the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center. And to all the friends of the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center here with us. It is also great honor to have Andrea Joni with us, sharing her vast knowledge. I had the pleasure to spend some time with Andrea in Budapest some years ago, and I am very gratified that she agreed to speak to us tonight. We remember today not only the 77th commemoration of the deportation from Hungary, but today, the 19th of April, 1943 was also the day when the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising began. Today, in fact, globally, this day is remembered as the 78th anniversary of the start of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. But today, we gathered to mark the 77th anniversary of in commemoration of the deportation of the Hungarian Jews and their murder during the Holocaust. And indeed, with sad heart, we also pay tribute to our beloved Holocaust survivor and volunteer at our center, dear Veronica Phillips, who passed away on the 24th of February this year at the age of 94. It is a great honor to have Janice Leibowitz, her niece, and the closest family to Veronica, with her children, her family here with us. Veronica and her family, the Katz family, lived in Budapest. She was born in 1926 and had many relatives throughout Hungary. Actually, according to a 1941 census, Hungary, including its annexed territories, had a Jewish population of 825,000 Jews. It was about 6%, just less than 6% of the total population of the country. Now, what is interesting is that this figure of 825,000 includes 100,000 Jews that were no longer Jews. They converted to Christianity. But under Hungarian race laws that were passed between 1938 to 1941 and were modeled on the Nuremberg laws of Germany, actually those that saw themselves as Christians were considered and classified as Jews. And they were also persecuted, and many were murdered. In 1939, the Hungarian government forbade Jews to serve in the army and actually established a forced labor service. And by 1940, all Jewish men that were able to had to join these forced labor service. And amongst them was Mayor Katz, Veronica's father. He served in those forced labor service for some years until he managed to come back home to Budapest. After Hungary entered the war as part of the German Axis powers, the forced laborers were deployed also in war-related construction work and often under very brutal conditions. And at least 27,000 of them died in those horrific circumstances. Luckily, as I said, Mayor Katz survived and he returned home. But we will see that sadly, he did not survive the war. There were some early deportations from the annexed territory of Hungary in the summer of 1941. 20,000 Jews who were not Hungarian citizens were from Subcarpathian Rus, and they were deported to Kamenets-Podilsky, where they were murdered, that is in the Ukraine, where they were brutally murdered in the mass shootings by the Einsatzgruppen. None of them survived. Other massacres occurred to non-Hungarian Jews in 1942. But the Prime Minister of then Hungary, Miklos Kalai, refused the German demands to deport all Hungarian Jews. At that stage, in 1944, Germany was losing the war, and Kalai, with the leader of Hungary at the time, Regent Horthy, Miklos Horthy, tried to negotiate a to leave the war, to leave the German Axis and to join the Allies. But to prevent these efforts, German forces occupied Hungary on the 19th of March, 1944. Horthy was permitted to remain as regent, and the new prime minister that the Germans appointed was the fanatically pro-German Szőnyi. He committed to continue to fight side by side with the Germans and to deport the Hungarian Jews. In April of 1944, Hungarian authorities ordered Hungarian Jews living outside of Budapest, about 500,000, to concentrate in certain cities, and ghettos were established. Those ghettos were around only for a few weeks, and some of them were liquidated within days. From the 15th of May to the 9th of July of 1944, Hungarian officials, under the guidance of the German SS and the notorious Adolf Eichmann, deported over 440,000 Jews from Hungary. Most went to Auschwitz-Birkenau and to their death, immediate death, murdered in the gas chambers. But thousands more were sent to the border with Austria to be deployed in digging, fortification, and trenches as a last stance against the Allied forces' invasion of Europe. By the end of July 1944, the only Jewish community left in Hungary was that of Budapest. Veronica and her family were there. As the military situation deteriorated, the Horthy government tried to again negotiate with the Allies, this time with the Soviet Union. But meanwhile, of course, the deportation continued. Horthy halted these deportations only in July of 1944. Because of the efforts for armistice with the Soviet Union, he was deposed, and in mid-October 1944, the Germans sponsored the coup and arrested Horthy and installed a new Hungarian government under Ferenc Szálasi, the leader of the fascist and radically anti-Semitic Arrow Cross. During the Szálasi regime, Arrow Cross gangs perpetrated a reign of terror against the Jews of Budapest. Hundreds of Jews, both men, women, and children, were murdered brutally in the Danube River and in forced labor and more. In November of 1944, the Arrow Cross ordered the remaining Jews of Budapest to move into a ghetto. Veronica and her family managed to get a protection certificate from the many diplomats that tried to save the Jews and establish the international ghetto in Budapest. The famous Raoul Wallenberg from Sweden, the famous Karl Lutz from Switzerland, and many others tried to help those Jews that were fearing deportation and death. Despite Karl Lutz trying to save Veronica's family, this did not help Veronica. Indeed, they moved into the international ghetto. They had the Schutzpass, or the protection document, but Veronica and her father were caught in the street. Despite having a work permit, they were deported. Veronica was deported to Ravensbrück concentration camp, and her father to another camp, and finally to Buchenwald, where he died. Veronica survived Ravensbrück, Penig, and Johanngeorgenstadt concentration camps, and a death march. Soviet troops drove the last German units and the Arrow Cross collaborators out of Hungary in early April of 1945. From the 825,000 Jews in Hungary and its annexed territories, only about 255,000 survived. Amongst them, Veronica's mother and Veronica's brother, as well as Veronica. When Veronica returned home after liberation, she found and reunited with her beloved mother and brother. She also found her childhood doll that her mother kept. She donated that doll to the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center, and you can find it in our permanent exhibition. Veronica married a survivor, Herman Phillips, and following her brother Michael, Janice's father, they moved first to England and then to South Africa, where she taught genetics at Wits University. She was one of the most impactful volunteers of the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center. She spoke to hundreds of groups from schools, universities, and other groups about her difficult life and about how she appreciated education. We miss her terribly. I invite you all to go into the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center YouTube channel, where we posted today a very touching tribute to Veronica Phillips. I also invite you to read in our books on our website under publication. The publication Portraits of Survival includes the story of Veronica Phillips. Thank you.
Thank you, Tali. And now it's my honor and my privilege to introduce you to our guest speaker tonight, Andreas Joni, who is the head of programs for international education at the USC Shoah Foundation. She is also director of Hungarian educational NGO Zakor Foundation for Social Remembrance, founded in 2007. And she is the author of several multimedia and digital testimony-based educational materials and runs educational programs, including professional development programs for teachers in Hungary and abroad. She is an expert member of the Education Working Group of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, the IHRA. So it is a great honor to have you with us tonight, and we look forward to your presentation, Andrea.
Thank you so much. First of all, I'd like to welcome everyone and would like to express my thanks for including me into this magnificent program. Thank you, Tali. I would like to say thank you to His Excellency and the whole staff of the Johannesburg Holocaust Museum and the Hungarian Embassy. Thank you so much. In a minute, I'm going to share my screen to start the presentation. I hope I will manage. 1 second. Okay, so you should be able to see my PowerPoint now. Are you seeing it? Okay. As it was mentioned, I come from the field of education, and this is that will kind of embrace the presentation today. This is a commemoration event, but I think we cannot leave out education whenever we whenever we talk about commemoration. And in my presentation, I would like to focus on, obviously, testimonies, personal narratives, kind of to translate the numbers into individual and personal stories. As I was preparing for this presentation, I looked up the testimonies of survivors in the Shoah Foundation Visual History Archive, the testimonies of survivors who come from Hungary and lived in South Africa. So I picked a couple of clips from these testimonies, obviously from the testimony of Veronica, also from the testimony of her brother, Michael, and some others. Please feel free to drop in any questions or comments in the chat as I'm speaking, or you can just stop me to clarify things, or we can come back to Q&A at the end of the presentation. Before I go to these individual stories, I would like to start with a little introduction of the USC Shoah Foundation and the institute that is based in California, Los Angeles, a global institute with a mission to develop empathy, understanding, and respect through testimony. So we focus on testimony, and I will elaborate that in a minute. But what is important is that we, in our mission, we express that we work towards developing something rather than working against something. So we don't counter this and that. We could enumerate the things that we could fight against. We want to develop something. We want to develop empathy, understanding, and respect. This kind of defines our work. A little bit of the history of the USC Shoah Foundation, which was founded in 1994 after Steven Spielberg directed the film Schindler's List, where he used a lot of survivor testimonies or spoke with a lot of survivors. And afterwards, he decided to initiate a foundation to collect the testimonies of survivors and witnesses of the Holocaust that can be still collected from around the world. The collection period started and concluded, or continues, so to say, and in 2006, this foundation, the institute, moved to the University of Southern California to a university setting, which kind of defines our work and gives different frames for our work. And the 4 pillars of our work today is access. So how can we make these testimonies accessible? Research, education, and global outreach. So let's have a look at the collection. So what is this that we are talking about? Because I have not mentioned yet the scope of the collection. We have a collection of 55,000 testimonies, video testimonies, taken in 65 countries and 43 languages, so all over the world. And what started out to be a collection of testimonies of Holocaust survivors and witnesses at the beginning, which is still the vast majority of the testimonies in the archive, was then we added other testimonies of other survivors of other genocides, like the Nanjing massacre, Cambodia, Guatemala, Armenia, even the Rohingya, and the newest collection is a collection of testimonies of current anti-Semitism. A couple of numbers. If you wanted to watch all the testimonies that we currently have in the archive, you would need a total of over 116,000 hours in a row. No bathroom, no eating, no sleeping, nothing. The average length of the testimony, of a testimony, is about 2 hours, a little bit more than 2 hours. What is fascinating about the archives, about our archive, is that the testimonies that we collected have been indexed, and keywords has been added to each segment of the testimony. This brings us to almost 66,000 keywords or indexing terms that we have in the archive, We also have a collection of over 700,000 images, and almost 2 million names are mentioned in the archive, in the testimonies. Let me just pause a little bit here at the names. So the reason why it is very, very important to have all those names, obviously there are kind of research aspects, but also when there are names mentioned in the testimony, names of people who did not survive, this might be the only place where this name is actually remembered. And when we think about how people were dehumanized and how their names were turned into numbers and how their names were taken away, it was very important. It's a very important aspect to try to give the names back in a way. This archive, this collection of materials is accessible, fully accessible at certain so-called access points or VHA sites, of which there are 170 all over the world in over 30 countries. And there are some other smaller collections at over 200 places. And I just want to mention here that out of these 170 access points, VHA sites, 40 are in Hungary due to a kind of a program in which the Hungarian Academy of Sciences supported the access to this material in every single district library and major universities. If we look at the collection, here you can see the breakdown of the collection. So what kind of topics there are in the archives and how many testimonies. If we look at the testimonies by language, then we can see that there are quite a number of languages. I highlighted the Hungarian language testimonies and the English language testimonies. Obviously, the English language testimonies are the most. If you look at the over 1,300 Hungarian testimonies, that doesn't mean that the Hungarian experience only shows in these testimonies, because there are thousands of other survivors and witnesses who gave testimonies in the country, in the language of the country where they emigrated. So it's a lot broader. If we look at the testimonies by interview country, we can see that over 800 interviews have been taken in Hungary and about 250 in South Africa. So going back to the collection, there were, after the collection of the testimonies, there were about 7 years of manual indexing. Indexers worked on the testimonies, and they assigned, as I mentioned, they assigned indexing terms or keywords to each segment of the testimony. The index terms are in English. They reflect experiences. And we already started to add transcripts to the testimonies in the archive. This indexing resulted in a searchable archive that is very user-friendly. This is what is just a screenshot from the archive. This is if you enter the Visual History Archive, this is the interface, and you can see that you can search by experience, groups, or index search, or by people. And there is one more which did not fit on the screen, so you can also search by places. So once the testimonies were recorded, archived, indexed, and preserved, the question was how we can get that to the public, because we kind of had to fight this very sensitive balance of protecting this very, very sensitive material, because survivors put their lives out there. Oftentimes it was the first or the only time they spoke about their experiences in such detail. If you watch a testimony, you might get to know that person better and deeper than maybe any of their family members. So this is really sensitive material. But at the same time, we want this material to be used for further generations in education and so on. So this tension brought about our multimedia digital educational portal called Eyewitness, or platform called Eyewitness, which contains a subset of the archive, about 3,500 of the 55,000 testimonies, full testimonies, and it is online. It is accessible online for educators after registration, and it also contains teaching materials with testimony clips. So this is something that serves the purpose of getting this material to the students and the teachers. So let me just give you a few words about education. I brought a quote about the importance of stories. So stories work with people, for people, and always stories work on people, affecting what people are able to see as real as possible and as worth doing or best avoided. Stories are a great asset in education. And we have these unique, each one of the testimonies in the archive is a unique story. And we have the stories in an audiovisual format, which even adds more to the impact. So we have to use these stories in education. One reason why we can use these testimonies in education in so many different ways is because the testimonies are full life histories. So the survivors or witnesses or even liberators, they were not asked what happened to them during the war. They were asked to speak about their lives. This brings us to full life histories, 20th century histories, with precious and unique and invaluable information about pre-war life in places where Jewish life ceased to exist. So we can bring back, these stories can bring back some of the memories of this pre-war life. So the interviewees were asked to speak about their life before the Holocaust or the genocide, obviously during and also after. So they also speak about immigration. They also speak about the difficulties in leaving their home countries, or the urge to leave their home countries, and the difficulties or non-difficulties of settling into a different culture. So it's really, really complex material. At the end of the testimonies, interviewees get a chance to introduce photographs or artifacts or documents from their family archives and comment on them. And again, you could see it previously that there are hundreds of thousands of photographs in the archive, and these photographs come with the story. The survivors comment on that, and that's also an invaluable teaching material. In some testimonies, you can see the family there, the children and grandchildren of survivors. I just want to make a footnote here, or open a very short bracket. This is really interesting how different the testimonies taken in the post-communist countries are from the testimonies that were taken in the West. Most of the families are not there in the post-communist countries, which tells us a lot about the second generation issues. So how difficult it was to identify as a Jew. And in some cases, survivors go back to the places where they were hidden, or even sometimes to a camp. Okay, so let's look at, I've been talking about the testimonies, so let's kind of glimpse into them. The first clip that I brought you is a clip of Veronica, obviously, when she speaks about how they lived in Vörösmarty utca, Vörösmarty Street in Budapest. let's listen to her. These are very short clips.
We lived in Vörösmarty utcai street in Hungary, which is middle class people live around there. It was quite a number of Jewish family. My father has owned a little sweet shop. My grandmother, on both sides, my mother and my father's side, were very religious people, and we've been brought up in the traditional Orthodox way. We used to go and pray in a little, practically a little shul behind the street, and it was very Orthodox. Women and men were sitting completely different. Mechitze between the two I forgot to speak English.
Between the men and the women.
Between the men and women, and they couldn't even see each other. My grandmother died. She used to live with us. She died in 1936. She didn't speak Hungarian, and that's why I can speak Yiddish quite well, because that was the only language which we could understand each other. My mother helped in the shop. I'm talking now 1933. Previously, my father was a cabinet maker, but he had a lot of problems with his stomach. He couldn't carry on with heavy work, so that's when they started to have a little sweet shop, and that's how we carried on.
Okay, so from this very simple and short clip, we can learn so much about religion, about the way of life in that particular social class. We can learn about the language that her grandmother, which is rare in Hungary, but her grandmother spoke Yiddish only. So that's super interesting. But there is one more thing that I wanted to highlight here, which is not the story itself. It's not the text, so to say. It's kind of the subtext. You could wonder why I did not cut out that piece when she reflects that, oh, I forgot to speak English. And I'm just posing the question that bringing back deep memories from her childhood, from another country, from Hungary, might kind of cause this kind of difficulty in not finding the words in English. So when you deal with testimony, when you work with testimony, you always have to watch for the text, for the story, what the interviewee says, but you should also look for the subtext, meta-communicative signs, the gestures, the tone of voice, and so on. So testimony is a super precious medium. Oops. The second clip, and I'm gonna now go in the order of the testimonies, so pre-life and during the Holocaust and so on. The second clip that I brought is a testimony, part of the testimony from Vera Reitzer, who actually, because she was not living in Budapest at the time of the deportations, they moved to what then was Hungary, Novi Sad, Újvidék, and she was deported from there, and she ended up in Auschwitz, and she speaks about the arrival scene. Again, we know so much about the kind of the arrival. We have read in books and seen in films, but here in her recollection, we see it from a different perspective.
And then when we arrived and they opened the doors, and men in these striped uniforms came in, and they whispered very quietly in Yiddish, then the children should be given to the elderly people. And the children should be given to the elderly people. You know, so you can imagine that not a single mother want to part from the child. So everybody kept their own child. I remember a friend of mine, she brought with her the family album. That was the most precious thing what she ever had. She had to leave behind. And then they said, in one queue must be the men, the other queue must be the women. And the men walked to the left. They disappeared very quickly. And the women, we had to stay 5 in a row. And we had to march towards a very, very good-looking German officer who was standing on a higher stand. On both sides, he had 2 SS women. And as we were marching, my mother, she looked very young. We took her in the middle. And another mother with a daughter was with us, so we were 5. And when we come on front of this officer, we had to stop. And then with his whip, he pointed who must go to the left and who must go to the right. Because this other woman looked quite old. He told her that she must go to the left, but her daughter started, no, I go with her. No, he said, you stay here. Now I go with her. So all right, go to the left. And when he looked at us, he said, there are the 3 sisters. Go to the right. Because my mother looked very young. And we went to the right. We didn't know who he is.
So again, obviously, we know about this scene. We know that there was selection. But with a change of perspective here, we are actually kind of looking, zooming into to that row of 5. We learn what a little bit. I mean, we can never go that close, but we can obviously go closer and look at it from with the eyes of Vera. There is another thing that I left in this clip, and I did that intentionally, again pointing out the text and the subtext kind of layers, that she mentions that someone brought the family album. So how people stick to their dear objects and what is important for them, what is valuable for them, and what they take with them. So it's also, when we think about education, these are very, very important points to note.
And David.
Sorry. Okay. Now this very, very, very short clip, a couple of seconds, I picked because I know that Veronica has been a keen speaker who shared her experiences and wanted to educate future generations. But this is what she says in 1995 when the testimony was taken.
I mean, I haven't told this story to anybody. This is, after 50 years, this is the first time I'm freely talking about it without really having a crying session.
So oftentimes, as I said at the beginning, when the testimonies were taken, those were the first occasions, the first time when survivors talked about their experiences. Sometimes that was the only time. Sometimes that started out something that lasted, like in the case of Veronica, that lasted years and throughout their lives.
I mean,
okay, so the next one is just a little example of how documents and photographs are introduced at the end of the testimony. Those who speak Hungarian can very well recognize the text, Hungarian People's Republic, it says, and then even some Russian text, Vengerskaya Narodnaya Respublika, and Irene Glazenberg. This is how Irene Glazenberg introduces her father, actually. That's the photo she has of him.
This is a passport from Hungary. Right, this is my father. His picture was taken for the passport in 1951, just before they left Hungary to come to South Africa. He passed away in 1959 here in Johannesburg. This is my father's picture. This is my mother, also a passport picture just before they left Hungary in 1951.
Also, from an educational perspective, it's very, very interesting to analyze these documents. Okay, and here comes something else. I found, as I was watching the testimonies, I found this very, very interesting testimony of Paul Herskovich, also born in Hungary and lived in South Africa. And he speaks about a piece of history that, again, we know about, what we don't know from the inside or quasi-inside. So we do know that the before the deportations started in 1944, there were atrocities against the Jews in Hungary. We know about the event when Jews were taken to Kamenets-Podolsky and killed there. Kamenets-Podolsky has no survivors, virtually. So we know very, very little about that. Actually, Paul helps us understand that a little bit more from a different angle, and I just invite you to watch his clip. I also left in something at the beginning just for the sake of interest, because he mentions, you will hear, he mentions they lived in Vörösmarty utca, which is actually the same street where Veronica and her family used to live. So this is just a coincidence.
Yeah, well, we lived, from what I heard, in the 6th district in Vörösmarty Street. In 1941, my parents were both taken away. Of course, Hungary was not at war in 1939 and for a few years thereafter, because Hungary was an ally of Germany. But because of the fact that Hungary was not at war, it was relatively calm. There were a lot of Jews who came to Hungary as refugees from other countries that had already been invaded. In 1941, they decided that all refugees were going to be sent to some district outside of Hungary to be gathered together. Initially, it was just the refugees to whom this happened, but it seems that soon after that, they included people who could not prove their citizenship, and my mother and father were taken and put aboard a train in August of 1941. Now, I've often wondered why it is that they had picked on my parents to take them, because they were certainly a Hungarian and I feel old established Hungarians. The proof to me would be that the sisters of my father were not taken away. So that means that my father certainly must have been able to prove his antecedents. Possibly the problem was with my mother. I don't know where she came from, and maybe it was because of that, or possibly they didn't need too many excuses in those days to ship the Jews out. So I have no idea why they were taken, but I'm sure that they weren't the only ones. In fact, I read subsequently that there were 16,000 Jews taken from Hungary in August of 1941. They were supposed to have been resettled in this new area, but what actually happened was that they were put on board the trains, and 2 days later they were handed over to the Germans, where of course they were exterminated. I was on board the train with them, but my two aunts who were at the station begged my mother to give me up to them, which eventually and very reluctantly she did. So that is how come that I am alive today.
So here we have this whole story that we can actually read about in history books. But at the end, all of a sudden, it turns out that here we are listening to someone who has been, who was on that train and was just by accident kind of rescued because her mother decided to hand him over. His mother decided to hand him over to the aunts, and that's how he stayed alive. And the train was off to Kamenets-Podolsky, where all the people who were on the train were killed. This is a very, very rare occasion or piece of testimony or recollection that we have about this event. So when we work with this material, when we work with the testimony, we can bump into details that we can never ever find anywhere else. No matter how many books are written about the story, we can find details, we can listen to fragments that are unique and provides a totally different perspective and helps understanding the events a lot more. Obviously, in this particular clip, I think that there is this very important emotional element at the end when we realize that he was on the train. He just did not get shipped, so he didn't go. So testimonies provide this opportunity to develop empathy as well, to work on not only on the cognitive but also on the affective level for students.
Yeah, well,
okay. This is just a very quick overview of how we work when we think about education. So testimony is in the center, and it kind of lies in the crossroads of teaching and learning about the Holocaust, teaching and learning towards transliteracy, because it's media literacy, it's information literacy, it's a historical understanding, and so on. It also, we also develop, everything we develop is standards based. So we try to check national core curricula, national curriculum, and develop materials that fit those standards and those curricula. And also whatever we develop, we try to develop it in a way that it impacts so-called the civil responsibility, responsible citizenship, at least to the extent that students can make responsible decisions in their own lives. We're not wishing or wanting to develop like rescuers and so on. We want students to make responsible decisions in their own lives. And here is an overview of the learning outcomes. You see testimony, critical thinking, empathy, and so on. Okay, another important element when we look at the testimonies is that they provide multiple perspectives. So these are individual stories, and we can raise these voices. We can listen to these individual voices. These are, by the way, these are the 7 survivors that I found in the archive, born in Hungary and living in South Africa. And I have here 2 clips just to demonstrate a little bit how the context defines answers to certain questions. As you can see, here are brother and sister, Veronica Phillips and Michael Kelvin, who is her brother, and they speak about pre-war anti-Semitism. And because they had different experiences, they speak about different types of experiences. Veronica went to a non-Jewish school, a mixed school. So she has a different experience to Michael, who went to a Jewish school, but still had experiences, but not in the school. So they provide different, when the question is asked about what was pre-war anti-Semitism like, we don't have an answer, like one answer. We have multiple answers, and the survivor stories bring in these multiple answers. So let's listen to Veronica first.
I was having a lot of problems because I was a Jew, though I was a very good student and very studious, but I couldn't go to the gymnasium, what was the higher education, because being a Jew, in the yearbook, the student who was very good and had first class from everything, it was in block letters printed, and obviously they couldn't do this, Israelite in block letters, so they gave me one not so good mark. I didn't have to be block letters.
So in a way, she experienced anti-Semitism in the schools. So it's more like an institutionalized prejudice or anti-Semitism. Whereas Michael, who went to a Jewish school, he recalls a different event.
In the apartment where we lived, there was a family who were quite high up in the hierarchy of Hungarian society. She was a minor member of the Hungarian opera, sang in the choir. I'm not quite sure, she might have had some minor parts as well. And her husband was one of the minor officials of the civil service. They had a son, and we very often played together because we were about the same age. I think we were about 6 or 7. And we often played together, you know, the usual way as kids play in the apartments. We'd go out and hide and seek and all that type of things. When one day, you know, I rang the bell at the apartments, you know, I wanted him to come out and play. I knew that he was there. The maid came to answer the door, and she said that the boy is not there. I said, well, you know, that's rather strange, because I actually seen him coming in and going in the apartment. And I said, well, I will try again, or when he comes, you know, why doesn't he give me a call? And he didn't come. And after a while, it went on for a few days, until my mother said that, you know, I better go and look for somebody else to play with. And it's interesting that it didn't need any more explanation. I understood exactly what was going on and what was the background. So we didn't pursue this association any further. And although we have seen each other in passing, you know, he comes out, he goes to school, and the parents were seeing each other, and there were the occasional hello and how are you, and then eventually the hellos and how are yous went down to just hello, and eventually the hellos disappeared as well, and then we were just passing each other like ships in the night.
So this is a different example of this, also kind of helps us understand this. It's a more subtle way of anti-Semitism, a more private, so to say, way. It also helps us understand the process. So especially at the end when he says that, well, first there were the hellos and the how are yous, and then just the hellos and then nothing. So the fact that this was a process is kind of very well understandable from this clip. Also, just want to highlight one more aspect, that from these testimonies, you can get factual information, but there is a lot of reflection as well. So from an educational perspective, you can teach the students about what is fact and what is reflection, what is fact and what is opinion. So these are very, very important skills to learn. Okay. Sorry. So very quickly, just the main areas that we work, the Shoah Foundation works in content development. So we develop educational materials, we do teacher trainings, we do additional testimony-based programs, and we work in partnership. As I mentioned, our primary educational channel is the Eyewitness digital education platform, which is free to use for educators after registration. There are users from almost 90 countries, 3,000 full testimonies you can find in Eyewitness, and there are over 200,000 users around the world. These are just a couple of thumbnails from the multiple language activities or educational lessons. Behind each of these thumbnails, there is a teaching material in the given language. Obviously, there are most of the activities are in English, but this is an example that we do have materials in so many languages, because we have the content in so many languages. Whatever we do, we localize. So we don't, the Shoah Foundation doesn't say that, well, this is the only way, this is what you have to do, what you have to use. This is, we say that this is the, here is the testimony, and here is the methodology, and localize it to your context, localize it to your language, to the experience in your geographical area, to the educational context, to the curriculum. And that's how, and that's why it is very easy to use internationally, globally. Very quickly, just a couple of innovations or innovative uses of testimony that I would like to show you. Another way we use testimonies is the so-called iWalk program, where we bring testimonies to locations in a mobile app. So we build out local history walks or educational programs around museums or memorial sites in various countries. This is just a snapshot of a couple of countries. These are thematic walks that include the physical location, the testimony, the story, and the pedagogical context. So students can type in answers to certain questions in the app, and the answers will land on the Eyewitness platform, where they can discuss it with the teachers in school afterwards. As I said, this is a program that kind of entails physical locations. We are working now on making this accessible or usable, more usable virtually, given the situation. But for the physical, I need to highlight one more thing. I mentioned previously how testimony brings back the stories that are non-existent anymore to places that are sometimes even also non-existent. So we can do an iWalk and include places where there is nothing or not that building. We can work on the void. We can work on the void by bringing in the story of what used to be there. So if, for example, in a Hungarian town or wherever in Europe or wherever, you stand in front of a building that used to be a synagogue, let's say, but now it's a furniture store, and nobody would know it used to be a synagogue. The testimony brings that history back. And this is also freely accessible from the Apple Store and the Google Play Store as well. a little more, even more innovative initiatives of the Shoah Foundation. We do have virtual reality films where we escorted survivors, in this case to Majdanek, and the film, a virtual reality film has been created from his visit. We also have VR programs for little younger kids. This is the story of a Polish origin survivor, Polish-born survivor, telling the story of his a story from his childhood in Poland, and we made an animated short film with the goggles. You can kind of get into the picture and the situation and learn about that. And then last but not least, one of our really greatest innovations is the interactive testimony, or the dimensions in testimony, which is a different way of capturing the story. Survivors are asked 1,500 to 2,000 questions that are mostly asked of survivors when they meet students, and they respond, and this results in an interactive testimony, a testimony that responds to questions. And this way we can kind of capture the interactivity and produce this interactive situation later on. I'll show you an example right now. Here.
Hello, Pinkus.
Just repeat that, please.
Okay. Hello, Pinkus.
Hello, how are you?
Fine, and you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Where were you born?
I was born in Łódź, in Poland.
Do you have children?
I have 3 children.
What do they do?
Please repeat that.
What do your children work?
My eldest daughter is a social worker. My son is a chief financial officer of a big American corporation. And my youngest daughter is also a social worker.
When were you liberated?
I was 13, going on 14.
Were you in a DP camp after the war?
When we left Theresienstadt, we were taken by the Royal Air Force in Lancaster bombers to a place called Troutbeck Bridge, which is near Windermere in the Lake District of England.
What is your favorite color?
My favorite color is blue.
Thank you very much for answering the questions.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for listening to me patiently.
So Pinkus, you can talk to Pinkus now on the via the Eyewitness platform. You can access the interactive testimony, and you can also access in an activity. It is possible that students work with him in a classroom, and we hope to have more of these testimonies, so we can have this inquiry-based learning. We can keep on, and we can have the students kind of experience talking and asking the question and getting the answers.
Hello, Pinkus.
And then just a short note about that we evaluate all our programs and our evaluation, and this is very simplified, obviously, but it shows that testimony does promote learning. It promotes complex thinking, obviously in genocide and tolerance education, but we also learned that it impacts minority students in profound ways. So those who have a more difficult time accessing information in a traditional way, then for them testimony is even more even more useful. And I just want to finish on something that we have in each testimony, something like a future message that survivors kind of send the next generations. And I would like to end with Michael's future message about to the next generations. Let's listen to this now.
The message is really that we have to make sure, not that it won't happen again, we have to make sure that the way we're going to create our life, the way we're going to put our lives together, when we live together, is to be aware how the other person feels and how the other person thinks and what lies behind that skin, whether it's white or green or black or whatever. There is always a human being behind that. And once we realize that, and once we get that message back, then we have a hope that this won't happen again.
Sorry. On this note, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to have questions, and thanks again for the invitation.
Andrea, thank you so much for that presentation, for not only showing us all the different resources that are available on the USC Shoah Foundation, but also just a reminder of how impactful and powerful sharing testimony is. I just wanted to mention that Pinkas Gutta is actually with us tonight, apparently. So I wondered if he would like to unmute himself and just say hello and perhaps share with us what that experience was like to be part of that multi-dimensional recording of your testimony is, and also what it meant to you, or what it means to you that your testimony is going to live on in such a real and vibrant way. So there, hello, Pinkas, welcome.
Hello. Well, I was listening very carefully, but it wasn't a very exciting experience because it was innovative. I was the kind of pioneer of this whole thing. It went on. It took them about 3 years to make it, to actually create the software that should actually work properly. But I think the most important aspect of the new dimensions in testimony, I call it new dimensions, actually now it's only called dimensions in testimony, is the fact that it's going to be able, that individuals are going to be able to interact with Holocaust survivors and survivors of genocide, because at the moment the Shoah Foundation is doing, things with the Rohingya, with Uyghurs and other people from genocides. And I think it's very important for people to be able to interact with the individual that was there, because I don't think that unless you can really be able to impart something as an eyewitness, somebody that actually was there and experienced it, it doesn't make the same effect. Reading is important, education is terribly important, and and history is terribly important. But the fact that the first-hand testimony is more important than anything else. So I feel that in future, because of IT is taking over education in general, I think this kind of thing is going to be able to educate youngsters who are actually now used to this kind of way of educating. Especially the pandemic has kind of taken over Zooms and so forth and so on. The people are busy, learning on tablets and computers and iPhones and so forth and so on. So I think it's a very important aspect, and I feel that whenever I go to a school, or at university, I hand them over a torch. And the torch, my torch is like an Olympic torch, but it's not exactly like an Olympic torch, because the Olympic torch has got one flame of goodwill among sportsmen and so forth, so on. Mine has got more than one. It's got many flames, and the flames represent the following: that I hope that there's going to be no religious discrimination, no racial discrimination, no homophobia, no xenophobia, and most of all, no hatred amongst human beings, that people should accept each other, like this other gentleman has said a minute ago. That's the most important aspect of what I try and teach. And if people can, I hand this over to everybody and I say, look, you take it home and spread it all over, spread these flames all over. And I think that aspect of being able to interact with other people, regardless whether you're there or not, whether you're frail or whether you passed away or whatever, I think is very important for the future of education in general.
Thank you so much, Pinkas. And I think your comment about the value of testimony and the impact it has, and I've certainly seen that in the classes that we run, that meeting a Holocaust survivor and sitting face to face in the room with somebody is just the most impactful and wonderful gift that we can give to our students because of what they take away from it. And I love that analogy of handing over the torch to them. So thank you so much for joining us tonight and for sharing that with us.
Keep well.
You too. And lots of lovely comments in the chat. If you've got any questions, please write them there. But there are lots of comments just thanking Andrea for a wonderful presentation, particularly from Janice, who was so touched and moved to see the testimony not only of her aunt, but of her father, and that wonderful message that he left us all with at the end of his testimony. So if there are any other questions, I know there was a question regarding how to access family members' testimony, and there has a link has been shared in the chat of how you can do that. So if anybody else was interested in how to access their family's testimony, you can just have a look at that link that's been shared in the chat and make a note of that. All right, if there are any other questions or comments from anyone? Okay, just lots of thanks for that wonderful presentation. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is just share my screen and share with you a trailer for the film that was mentioned earlier, The Revolt of Job. And yes, Shireen, there will be a recording made available. So let me just prepare that for you. So we're going to watch the trailer now. You will all be sent, anybody who registered for this commemoration will be sent a link to be able to watch the film. It's only available for the next 24 hours. So from tonight till tomorrow evening. And I believe when you play the video, if you click on the right-hand bottom corner, there should be a button that says CC or closed captions, and that will allow you to bring up the English subtitles for the movie. So let's just watch the trailer quickly together.
Mit látsz?
Lábon fényes pikkelyű halat látok, kék lábuk kakas sófára. Maga is lássa, papa!
Mi is juhászok vagyunk. Mi is azok vagyunk, Caddik. Csak egy évet adj be.
Mindenkire sort, elvesszük a kérőcédulát.
Csak egyet.
Feljött a csillag, áldott legyen a szédereste, hogy utódainkat te barát soraidban járassanak, Uram. Az örök húsvét felszabadulása, az emberi nem boldogsága felé. Bajra pré hagufen.
Mama, nézze! Mama! Megkaptam a Nem adlak oda. Nem vehetik el tőlem. Mama. Ez se Istennek, se embernek joga már nincsen. Ez a gyalázathoz nincs jog. Nem vehetik el tőlem.
Te add tudtól és hagyd örökbe ezen a mai napon, fiaidnak. Te beteljesítetted Mózes atyánk törvényeit. Nyugodtan elmehetünk már.
Hová?
Menjenek be a házakba! Ne vámészkodjanak! Menjenek be!
Kati, hová mentek? Mama! Papa, hé, itt vagyok! Papa!
Miért állt meg oda
Papa, a beltéren ágyaztunk a Dorkával. Papa, mama, papa.
Mit keresed?
Mama, én vagyok.
Megmondtam neked, hogy várd meg a messiást.
Mit lófrász? Ki az a kölök? Ismeri?
Nem ismerem.
Indulás! Gyerünk, gyerünk!
Mama!
Okay, so that looks like an incredibly powerful and moving story. Sorry, I apologize for that. So just remember that that movie will be available. In fact, Jordan has posted a link to the movie in your chat, so you can go across and have a look at that. But just remember that it is only available for the next 24 hours. Okay, so I just want to invite perhaps the ambassador or Andrea or Tali, if you want to make any final comments before we close this evening's event.
Just from my side to thank the Embassy of Hungary and the partnership, and Andrea, Szőnyi, such a pleasure to learn from you again today. So just to say warm thank you from our side and all the participants from South Africa and from around the world. Thank you so much for helping us remember the deportation from Hungary 77 years ago. Actually, on Friday was the commemoration day, the 16th of April. We truly appreciate it, and specifically to remember together our beloved Veronica Phillips. Thank you again so much.
I just also want to thank you for the invitation again. It was a great pleasure for me to have the possibility to share these stories with a wider audience. And thank you so much for including me into this event.
I would like to repeat myself. I would like to thank for everybody who's
Okay, wonderful. So just a final thank you from us here at the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center to our partners for this evening, to His Excellency the Ambassador for joining us. Thank you to the entire team working in the background, the Embassy of Hungary, but particularly to Susanna Rothschild, who's really worked with us through this whole process. Thank you to Andrea for that wonderful presentation as well. And thank you to the other partner, which is the Hungary Film Archive, for providing this film and making it available for us. I just wanted to share one last thing as we say goodnight, and that is a comment that was made by a student just in a program we ran on Sunday. She discovered that her birthday is the same birthday as Veronica Phillips, and so we shared Veronica's story with her, and she found that incredibly moving, and she left this comment. Sorry, as they were leaving. So this comment here, you should see it on my screen. During this amazing experience, I learned that I share a birthday with a survivor called Veronica, who sadly passed away last year. So on my birthday this year, I will give charity in her name. So just to demonstrate the impact of survivor stories and testimony have on students that visit our center. And as we say goodnight to everybody, I will leave that on the screen. But just to thank everyone for joining us again tonight, and to say good night and have a good evening further.